Welcome. I'm so glad you're joining me to learn about accounting, and it's a great place to start with the financial statements. So we're going to cover the income statement first. So let's take a look at some basics. First, an income statement matches the benefits of being in business with the efforts a business has to expend for a period of time. In other words, we're looking at the revenues, or what the company sells, and matching it against the expenses or costs that had to be incurred in order to generate those revenues. There are two formats. There's the single step, and this is the single step. And the single step you can tell because it doesn't have a gross margin in it. The multi-step does. The single step and the multi-step contain exactly the same information, it's just they're formatted differently. In a single step, all the revenues are lumped together and all the costs and expenses are lumped together, but we get to that net income. In a multi-step, we segregate our revenue and expenses by type. So net sales is what the sales price of the goods and services we sell are, minus the costs of those goods or services that are sold, to give us a gross margin, so that we're really comparing what it costs us to make a product with what we're selling the product for. We then subtract our other operating expenses to come up with operating income. And operating income is what we're in business day in, day out, and nothing weird or unusual about it. But the business also can have other kinds of revenue and expenses. So if I look at my single step, dividend income is probably not why this company is in business. So dividend income is an example of other income that would show up down below. Interest expense or interest income is always down in other. So when I look at other revenue and expenses, I expect to see interest income, interest expense, and other types of income that are not typical on a day-to-day basis for the business. Remember, we'll always subtract out our income tax expense to get our net income. So what are the key numbers that we're going to be hunting for in the financial statements to come? We're going to look for revenue or net sales. Net sales means it's the sales less the returns, less any discounts, less any allowances. In other words, it's the true sales amount, the sales that stuck with the customer. We're going to look at cost of goods sold or cost of sales, which are our product or service costs. Operating expenses, which generally have to do with selling, general, or administrative types of expenses. Operating income, we've talked about. Other revenue and expense we've talked about. Income tax expense we've talked about. And the bottom line is called net income or net earnings. So let's take a look at some. So we're going to find the following key numbers for the most current year on the next slide. So let's see how we do. This is Home Depot's consolidated statement of earnings, which is another name for income statement. And so we want to find net sales. So for the most current year, net sales is 74, let's see, this is in millions, so 74,754,000,000. The second number we want to find is cost of sales, which is this one. We want to find our operating expenses, and so this is our total operating expenses, and our operating income. So here's our operating income. Our other revenue and expense, notice that the ones in brackets are our income and the other ones are expense. So this is other expense. And then our net income or net earnings is down here, but here's our taxes. And notice instead of calling it income tax expense, it's called provision for income taxes. So if I were to write down all of these numbers, my solution would look like this. So what I'd like you to do now is to do the same type of thing, but I would like you to do it for Facebook. So please take a moment, pause the recording, and look for these numbers for Facebook. When you're done, proceed to the next slide. All right. Did you get these numbers? I hope so. Notice that Facebook has some different titles to items. So instead of calling it cost of goods sold or cost of sales, they call it cost of revenue. So one question that you can ask yourself as we go along is, how profitable was this business over the last 3 years, since they disclosed 3 years of information? Well, notice that for Facebook, and remember the most recent year is to your left, Facebook's revenues are increasing, but look down here at its net income. Its net income is a little erratic and has really dropped off. If you ask yourself why, the reason why is, I think Facebook has changed their strategy, and now they're heavily spending on research and development, new and interesting things to make Facebook a place that beckons on a daily basis. All right, here's another one. Here's Delta Airlines. So take a moment, look for these items for Delta Airlines' most current year, which is 2012. And when you're ready, we'll proceed. How'd you do? I hope you were able to find these numbers. Again, notice how Delta has changed the titles, but they mean the same thing. So total operating revenue instead of total revenue, and they had a net income, which is great. So how profitable has Delta been over the last 3 years? If I look at their operating revenue, I can see that their operating revenue is increasing each year, and I can see that the major reason for that is passenger revenue. That passenger revenue keeps going up every year. The net income is a bit erratic, but seems to stay around $2 billion, so nothing too shabby there. As far as their operating income, when we look down here at their net income, notice their net income is increasing each year. If you ask yourself why, the major reason appears to be for Delta that they're doing a good job of managing their revenues and costs. So here's that solution again. All right, it's the end of this video, so it's time for a self-reporting quiz. What you'll do is you'll find the following key numbers for the current year on the next slide, and if you look at your overall directions for these series of videos, it asks you to self-report to an email. And so please do for these items. So are you ready? Here's your quiz. Google. So can you find these items for Google? Good luck, and I hope now an income statement is not a scary place to look at, but rather interesting, because like for Google, it's very interesting to see how they're reporting their years. Notice that for them, their most recent year is on the total right, whereas all the others income statements we looked at, it was on the left, wasn't it? The left-hand column. Notice also how Google spends its money. Notice it has been spending more and more on research and development, but unlike Facebook, it's been in that game for quite a while. So enjoy!